Hi, my name is Doug, and today we're going to learn how to make pinhole cameras. What is a pinhole camera? These are pinhole cameras right here. A pinhole camera is nothing more than any kind of container that can be made light tight with a tiny hole on the front, the side, or in some position on the container. And we simply put film, photographic film or photographic paper inside, and we make a picture. There's two kinds of pictures you can make with a pinhole camera. One is an instantaneous picture, where you put the film in, you make the picture, you take the film out, and you develop it in photographic chemicals. That's one sort of picture you can take. The second kind, though, is something we call a solargraph, or this would be a solar camera in that case. And what you do there is you put the photographic paper inside the camera, and in this case you tape the camera to a pole or a ledge or somewhere very secure outside, and you point it south, and it simply records the passage of the sun each day for a week, a month, maybe even up to a year, as long as you want to leave it there. The advantage of using this as a solar camera is that you don't need any chemistry to develop the image. It just makes itself right on the film, okay, or on the paper, I should say. The disadvantage is the image is not quite as sharp and clear as it is when you make an instantaneous picture. Regardless, we're going to learn how to make cameras so we can do either one. All right, let's get started making our cameras. The first consideration is the paper that needs to go in the back of the camera to make the image. This is photo paper. This is not the kind of paper you put in your inkjet printer. This is the kind of paper that photographers use in a real photographic darkroom. And I would recommend just buying an inexpensive pack of 25 sheets of this paper, and I'll put a link later in the video to exactly what this is, but it's 5 by 7 inches in size. That will give us a big enough paper for just about any camera we choose to make, and we can cut it down so that it's a more precise fit. That's what I would recommend. There are other sizes of paper you could choose to use, but I'm going to recommend this to start with. So the paper had something to do with the size of the camera that we're going to make. In this particular case, we're going to make a camera out of a tin can like this. This tin can is something I got at the Container Store. It's very inexpensive. I think it was a couple bucks, something like that. And it's just a metal can with a nice, good fitting lid. It's very important that the lid fits really well because we don't want any light getting inside the camera except through the pinhole that we make. So the first thing we're going to want to do is take this, and by the way, you can use any container you want, but I recommend something along this size. The first thing we're going to want to do is paint the interior of the can black. And I've already done that with this camera. This camera is farther along in the construction. We're going to paint the interior black, a flat black. We're going to do the same thing with the lid. I'm just using a flat black spray paint from Home Depot or Ace Hardware, anywhere you get it. So flat black is what I recommend. So the first thing we're going to do is paint the inside of the container black and set it aside so it can dry. And then we'll move on to the rest of the construction. Okay, for the next stage of building our pinhole camera, we have to make the pinhole lens. Lens is really not a proper term. The lens is really just a hole. That's all it is. We need to make our pinhole lens in some kind of very thin material. Some kind of metal is what we're going to use. And I like to use thin shim brass, which I have a sheet here that we're going to cut up and use. However, if you don't have that, one of the things you can use is simply a aluminum can. And I just picked one up outside as litter. And you just take your scissors and you can literally just poke a hole and cut a chunk out of a aluminum can, and that will be perfectly fine as well. Okay, so now we've got a piece of metal, looks like this. cut off a few of the jagged edges here so we don't cut ourselves. What we're going to want is we're going to want a piece of metal that's roughly, let's say, an inch square. So an inch by an inch. Okay. And I'm just going to bend this so it's a little flatter. The thinner, the better. So here's this aluminum can metal. And I've also got this shim brass, as I said. And I'm going to cut a 1-inch square out of that as well. We just set that aside. So either kind of material is fine to make our lens with. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and use my brass just because I like that. Okay, what we're going to do now is actually make the pinhole. So what I've got here is I've literally got a safety pin. Okay, it's just any old safety pin you can find. I like to spread it out so it's a little bit easier to hold on to. And I like using a cutting mat here just so I don't damage the table. This is just a workbench, but so I don't damage the table. And what I want to do is I want to place the pin right in the center of my piece of metal, as close as I can get to the center. And depending on what kind of surface you're working on, you want to push down a little bit. You don't want the pin to go all the way through. You just want to push down a little bit here, because we're going to make a very small hole. The hole's going to wind up being probably around 0.3 millimeters, but that's not critical. What we're going to do is while we're pushing down, we're going to spin this piece of metal around. What this does is it assures us that the hole is round. Okay? Once we've done that, it's going to be very hard to see, but there's a tiny, tiny hole in this piece of metal. If I flip it over, I can feel that there's a burr on the back because we didn't really drill it out. We just pushed through it, so we created a little burr of metal. We don't want that. So I'm going to take a piece of very fine sandpaper or emery cloth, the finest thing you can find, and we're simply going to sand that down so that there's no burr on the back here. Okay? Now, when we did that, we probably distorted the hole. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the pin exactly back in the hole. And this is the part where I need my cheater glasses to do this. We're going to put it back in the hole and we're going to spin it around again. And then we're going to flip it over, and sure enough, we created a little bit another burr, not as bad as the first one. But we're going to sand that off. So the goal is to make a nice, perfectly round hole with no burrs, and that will make the best kind of image that we can. So we just do that about 3 times. That's what I've had the best luck doing, is doing it about 3 times. And then if you hold this up to the light, you should be able to see the very small round hole. And it's very, very tiny, as I said. So this is now your pinhole lens, and you shouldn't feel any burr on the back of it. Okay? So the next step is we're going to need to be able to tape this lens inside of the camera. And so I'm just going to put some tape around this pinhole lens, not covering up the hole. Just some black tape. You can see that I'm not doing anything very precise here. So now I have my little pinhole right in the middle of this black tape area, okay, with tape all around it. And then this tape is going to allow me to tape this inside my camera. So the next step is we go get the camera that's been drying because we painted the inside black. We're going to go get that now. Okay, now we're ready to mount our lens in our camera, or the painted can that we prepared in the previous step. So here's my can. It's all black on the inside. The lid is painted black as well, as you can see. All right, I've actually already drilled the hole, as you can see, in the side. But what you're going to want to do to drill that hole is you're going to need a drill with a fairly large drill bit, certainly not the size of the pinhole, because we don't want this hole to obscure what's happening in the camera. We want it nice and big. And you're simply going to use a drill and a drill bit to drill a hole in the side of the camera like we've shown here. I prefer to drill it about halfway down, and it doesn't matter, since it's a round camera, it doesn't matter where in the side you drill it. And you don't need to have it be real clean hole and smooth, no need to sand it or anything like that. So once we have the hole in the camera, the next thing we're going to do is take our pinhole lens that we prepared in the previous step, and we're going to simply tape it inside the camera, centering the pinhole as best we can in the middle of the big hole that we drilled. And then we're going to just push this tape down really nice and hard all around inside, so that's secured really well inside and there's no light leaks in the camera. And if you look down, you should be able to see light through the hole in your camera. And at that point, our camera's done. Lid should fit on tight, and there we go. One final thing we need to do though, we need to take a piece of tape and use it as a shutter. We don't want light coming into the camera when we're just hauling our camera around, taking it places. So we put a piece of tape over the top here to make a shutter that we can later pull off when we're ready to make our picture. I bend the edge down so it's easier to yank on that and get it off. You might want to use 2 layers if your tape is not opaque. So there, our camera is ready. Next, we're going to load our camera with paper. Okay, in this final step, we're going to load the camera with paper. The first thing you're going to want to do is measure how big that paper actually needs to be. So if I put a ruler in my camera here, I find out that it's about 2 1/4 inches deep, and since it's a round camera, it's about 3 1/2 inches in diameter. And I'm sure you all remember from your math days that the circumference of the can is pi times the diameter. So pi is 3.14, the diameter is 3 1/2. If you do the math, that means the camera is almost 11 inches around. Okay, we're not going to actually use 11-inch paper for this because we don't want to cover up the lens. We don't want to cover up the lens that's inside here, okay? So we want the paper to just go partially around inside the camera. So remember, we bought that 5x7 paper. So that's what we're going to use here. And I did this in a dark room, but now that I'm in light, I'm going to expose it to the light and it's going to ruin the paper. You're going to want to do this step in the dark. You're going to load the paper in the dark or very dim light. Red light is a great way to do it. If you need to do it in total darkness, that's fine too. But I've pre-cut my 5x7 paper down to strips that are 2 1/4 in width, because that's the height of my camera, and of course they're 7 inches long because that's what the paper was. So in the dark or under red light, you're going to need to put this in the camera. So the first thing I do is find where the pinhole is. You can kind of feel that with your thumb, and you know that that has to remain uncovered if you're going to make a picture. The second thing I'll show you is that one side of this paper, hopefully you can see it, is kind of glossy, and that's the emulsion side. That's the side where you're going to make a picture. The other side is just dull. It's just a matte finish because that's just a plain paper. So you want to find the shiny side. A lot of times you can literally feel where that is if you need to do this in the dark. And you're going to simply put that paper in the camera as shown here. And you want to make sure that the paper is not obscuring the pinhole. Okay? It doesn't need to be perfectly centered. If it's a little bit off to one side, let's say it's, maybe around more to this edge than that edge, it's not a big deal, okay? Just as long as the paper is not obscuring the pinhole here. So we've got that paper inside now. We're doing this in the dark, remember, or under red light. Once we have it in there, we put the lid on the camera, and the lid stays on the camera until we're finished making the photo. But you're now ready to go outside, take this camera, and make your picture. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make a long exposure So on a bright sunny day, a camera about this size will require about 30 seconds to a minute to make a picture. So what your student's going to need to do, or what you're going to need to do, is you're going to need to set it down somewhere and point it where you're going to make a picture. I like to put a little black mark on the can so I can see where it's pointing. You set it down. Sometimes you put something heavy on top of the can so it doesn't blow away if it's breezy out, okay, just so it's stable. And once you've got it pointed where you want to have it pointed, you simply take the piece of tape off the front of the camera and you leave it for the 30 to 60 seconds you need for the exposure. You don't move the camera or your image is going to be blurry. Taking selfies is possible, but you got to sit really still for 30 to 60 seconds. When the picture's done, you simply put the tape back on over the hole, like this. If you were going to use this as a solar camera, you would be putting this in a tree or on a pole and taping it securely to the tree or the pole. Then you would remove the tape here to expose the pinhole lens, and you would be leaving that up for a week, a month, or possibly even a year before you take it down and look for the image inside. So we have our pinhole camera made, it's loaded with paper, and we can go out and make our picture.